when you bring researchers together who have expertise in brain science or implementation science, whatever it is, together with practitioners who have day-to-day expertise in working with real families in the field, we really just start from a stronger place when you bring those two perspectives together.
Working on Find Fathers was actually my first time doing a true community research partnership, and I was lucky to work with Children's Home Society of Washington on that. FIND stands for Filming Interactions to Nurture Development, and it's a program that was originally developed by Phil Fisher at Oregon Social Learning Center. And what FIND is really about is coaching parents on serve and return interactions with their very young children. Find Fathers is an adaptation of the original Find program that we adapted specifically for dads.
It really has been a collaborative process so that we've all been equal partners in the work. When I think back to the initial pilots with Children's Home Society, I think when we started that work, there was understandably a little bit of an expectation that we as the intervention developers were bringing in this finished product, that we were just going to hand them a manual and ask them, to go do the work. But in reality, what we wanted, and I think what we ended up doing, was a much more co-creative, collaborative process.
Being a direct service practitioner, you're sort of given a lot of how you're supposed to do the job. You can't talk back to the person who created the intervention or the assessment or sort of even the philosophy of work. So it took me a while to get used to this style. I remember my coworker Rachel, who we both started working on Find together. Early on, she was sending feedback to the folks at University of Oregon, and I was like, Rachel, they're gonna get mad at you. You can't say those things. You're you're saying negative things about their intervention. And it took me a while to realize that that's what they wanted from us. They wanted actual feedback from our experience, on the ground, working with families, and that has made the intervention so much stronger.
I would say about halfway through the kind of development process, we realized even with my experience doing research on dads and Children's Home Society's team's experience working with families and fathers, there were some questions that we weren't able to answer. And so we decided to talk to fathers themselves and also to talk with some other home visitors who had worked with families and some dads to help us to figure out how to better meet the needs of the fathers that we were serving, and then also to try out the ideas we had about using Find with fathers and how fathers reacted to those ideas before we started kind of doing a pilot run. And I think by doing that, it set us up for better success, and I think the perspectives of the home visitors and of the fathers and of Jason and Luke at Children's Home Society of Washington just made for a higher quality project that we also felt like we would be more likely to be successful implementing in a real world context. We started having weekly meetings between the research team and Children's Home Society of Washington to talk about things like what's the intervention going to look like for dads? How are we going to recruit fathers? How are we going to retain fathers? What measures should we use that are both practical and scientifically accurate and give good information to Children's Home Society of Washington?
When I was working with Holly Schindler at UW on a specific fathers project, I remember there was just one little incident where she used a house icon to show the in-home portion of the intervention. And I used to work in homeless services, so my feedback was can we not use a little house icon? A lot of the families we work with don't live in homes. And Holly was really open to that and really happy to get that feedback. And it felt, it was sort of it's very minor, but also surprising to feel your input is valued, but then also that you're making a more respectful intervention because of those little details.
I think that implementation sites are invaluable partners in the process. They know the families that they serve better than anybody. They know the systems within which those families are served. They know the funding processes and the other community partners. And their sort of on-the-ground experience of the pilot process is priceless information because it informs us about the way the model is working sort of when the rubber meets the road. And as intervention developers, if we can be receptive to that feedback and incorporate it and act on it and take it to improve our model and our materials and our processes, then the model ends up being all the better.
It's really rewarding to think that when we come up with that project together, it's both answering questions that are scientifically important, but also things that their organization cares about and that they want to know if the program is working on these particular areas, and for whom is it working for, and what are the next steps. And I think that makes it exciting for me as a researcher to know that it can have an impact, and it can be something useful to a community organization that's serving a population that I care about. And so it makes the whole process is just so much more rewarding than if we were doing it separately.